massive victory for India. Responding to critics who argue India should have gone further, he asserted that India's goal was not maximalist warfare but strategic success. Today he joins us live all the way from Colorado. So let's go straight across to him. John, appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much for taking out the time. I know you've been keeping very busy, but appreciate the effort. First question, John, what do you think, or who do you think had the upper hand in this conflict that concluded between India and Pakistan, and why, in simple terms?
In simple terms, it's undeniable that India demonstrated overwhelming upper hand, or what I call military superiority, but also diplomatic superiority, with clear messages, a rapid production of the facts on what India was targeting at will, with no response or really denial by the Pakistan military. I definitely think they had the upper hand every step of the way outside of the initial awful attack of April 22nd. India seized the initiative. It responded with overwhelming military superiority, demonstrated the upper hand in defensive capabilities as Pakistan tried to attack with their drones. So every step of the way, but also that strategic clarity that you talked about at the end of knowing when they have achieved their strategic goals, established a new doctrine, a new red line, and set a path to a better place for the future.
John, we'll talk about that red line that you just mentioned in just a moment, but there is also a talk of downing Indian jets by Pakistan. There hasn't been any corroboration. There is no proof. Do you dismiss that as cheap tactics, or do you think that is a part of face saving when you lose a battle?
Yeah, it was interesting to watch how quickly it was announced with no evidence, right? So India demonstrated what it hit, every site with satellite footage that you can see on a modern battlefield, even if India didn't do that, but even the Indian military put out satellite footage. But Pakistan was really quick to demonstrate, and I think it was in a bit of chaos, to talk to their own people, through their own military, that they had success in downing Indian aircraft. That hasn't been verified up to this date, and India has said that that didn't happen. So really, if you want to refute, if you want to verify that claim, show some type of wreckage, show some type of proof that you shot something down. India didn't say that they had no casualty, no combat, basically, cost. So that was really interesting. As the Indian military said, there's always cost in conducting military operations, but all Indian pilots return safely, and there's no footage of wreckage. So I don't dismiss anything in warfare, because there's always a fog. You know, famous military theorists say 3/4 of war is covered in this fog, but clearly that was a claim that wasn't by evidence and spread by international media and Pakistan media to try to bolster their motivation. But I think it's unlikely to be true.
Excellent. John, do you think with this attack, India has sent a message to the entire world and not just Pakistan or China? They are obviously adversaries that India has acknowledged, and these countries have also acknowledged India as their adversary.
I think it's sending a clear message absolutely to Pakistan and its state back of terror, but also a clear message to everyone, those who back Pakistan or directly back Pakistan's terrorists. Clearly, that was one of the strategic goals here achieved, was a statement and a message to the world and those who back terror against India or just basically in opposition to India. That was that fourth goal that I think that India achieved here, was establishing strategic independence. India will pursue and has been pursuing its independence, but also working with the global community to increase economic ties, military ties, all of this. But I think it was a clear message, and now we get to see, I think it was a moment, right? This is a new India, a new doctrine, and we get to see how that ripples across to India's alliances and also those that are in opposition to India and who they partner with. Continued Chinese partnership with Pakistan, Turkish partnership with Pakistan. This is what that grand strategy that is evolving since this attack.
John, do you think that China has been embarrassed that it did not find any role in the ceasefire which was started by Pakistan and of course announced by Donald Trump? and that China's weapons were also used and to a large extent were mitigated by Indian offense?
I don't know if they were from the diplomatic sense embarrassed. Clearly, by the military sense, that they've been selling technologies and guarantees that have been shown. War is always the test. You have war on paper and you have war in reality. And undeniably, Chinese technologies were shown not to do what they were basically guaranteed to be able to do. India penetrated radar sites, missile sites, you name it, at will. On the diplomatic means, China is very crafty on how it saves face within its own population, and the Chinese basically cyber wall is very the strongest in the world. So they control information very clearly. Interesting on that grand, that diplomatic, and where the United States was very active in wanting to assist. And India said, we don't need help here, but we're always open for discussions and partnering with the United States, two of the greatest, strongest nations of the world, right? India, the United States, and other allies are in conversation of, this is a new world we're living in, and terror that has been allowed will no longer be supported. So that Chinese diplomatic stance is always gray, but it's been interesting to watch since this 4-day decisive operation by India.
John, do you think by and large, the Western world and the Western media is actually impervious to, the conflict that has, existed between India and Pakistan? Because after the ceasefire, there was not much talk about it in the Western media. Do they understand the gravity of the conflict when these two nations, spat with each other? They're both nuclear. Things could escalate because when in war, John, I'm sure you're familiar with this, that misinformation or lack of information can accelerate things, can escalate things beyond control. But the Western media and the Western world perhaps is not privy to this. What do you have to say to that?
I think it is absolutely something that I've observed in this war, as somebody who follows lots of wars, where international media will cover something minute by minute, day by day, misinformation by misinformation in places like Gaza or other places. But in this war, they covered the beginning because if it bleeds, it leads. In the concern without actual bringing on the experts in this decades-long state-backed terror campaign, this low-intensity conflict, really since 1999, that Pakistan has been deploying, turning the blind eye in this situation, but not covering the strategic significance of this development, shifting their attention rapidly other places. I've found that very revealing when this is a very important issue, not just how India brought this to an end with a lot of strategic clarity, especially like the nuclear blackmail, that they will not accept this nuclear blackmail. Media will cover the potential for nuclear escalation in some type of over dramatizing the potential risk, when actually, no, we should be calling out that just because you have a nuclear weapon doesn't mean you get to continue to violate all international law, international norms, and do things like your state-backed terrorism campaigns against your neighbor. It is revealing, though, how lack of international media attention has been covering even after the pause in fighting has been happening, and what is the path forward to actually change the behavior of the Pakistan government, military, to not back terrorism.
Absolutely right, John. John, do you also think there's been this stark contrast between the way Pakistan has been treated while it has nuclear bombs, and how Iran has been treated by the West by just having aspirations of having a nuclear bomb or having a nuclear policy? Do you think that this imbalance is also something which should be addressed for sure?
I think so. I mean, the imbalance I think that it is right to focus, and the United States president in the Middle East right now is focusing the world, and I think that's right, on the Islamic regime in Iran's intentions of having a nuclear weapon. And I think Pakistan is a great example of
let me supplement that question, John, by saying that
Yeah.
both these nations have harbored and promoted terrorism. Iran, of course, with the Houthis and Hamas, and Hezbollah, Pakistan with Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba. So it's really baffling for India to see that why does Pakistan get treated with kid gloves?
Yeah, no, it's a long history, right? So the global war on terrorism, the United States' operations, I mean, the fact that Osama bin Laden was found next to the basic Pakistan military academy, hidden in, supposedly without them knowing, how they harbored the Taliban every fighting season in the federally administrated tribal areas. That double standard of treatment towards Pakistan across this time, even during the 2008 Mumbai attacks, the pressure put on India to seek a diplomatic rather than a comprehensive response to that. It is absolutely telling and unfortunate, but this is a new world. You have new leadership, both in India and other places. We have to stay focused on not allowing Iran to get a nuclear weapon, but also we have to change our position that has been unfortunate. The past is a prologue, of course, on this can't continue. Why was it allowed? A lot of answers to that complexity, but this is a new moment and it should no longer be allowed for sure.
John, how does this change the global concern towards nuclear warfare and armament? Donald Trump said that no extremist nation should have nukes, and yet Pakistan has nukes. Iran is aspiring to have nukes. There has to be a collective effort from developed nations, mature nations like India and the United States to work constructively and disarm these nations.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, and you got to add North Korea in there. That's a real complex, and I'm absolutely, there's a lot of conversations on non-nuclear proliferation, but also reducing the number of nuclear weapons available. I think it starts with, and this is why I've written so much about India in the last few days. This sets a global standard of, even if you have a nuclear weapon, that not being a get out of jail card to do anything you want, like we've seen even Russia do in Ukraine. Like, that fear of nuclear escalation should always be taken, but it can't be used recklessly by those that have. So it should be a global warning. But this is where I think why I've been studying Operation Sindoor, because there was such strategic clarity on, look, nobody wants nuclear war, and it's reckless to use it as a saber to rattle whenever you want to do something that is unlawful, should be called out, and there should be a line in the sand, even if you have nuclear weapons. Yes, absolutely a caution, but there's, taking some, basically disarming, but this should be a warning. And again, why we should have global efforts on no new nuclear armed states, especially those that are extremists, in their intentions on why they want it, to be able to do things outside of this global international order that keeps peace in place.
John, how are these nuclear facilities supposed to be guarded? I was watching a documentary the other day in which Osama bin Laden, a few months before he died, was literally window shopping for a nuclear weapon. And Pakistani, senior prominent, officers in the Pakistani army were helping him. What if, this nuclear weapons that India could perhaps or potentially could target gets into the wrong hands? There is also this, talk of a leakage of radiation in Pakistan just a few days ago. What if this gets into the wrong hands? What is the world supposed to do now?
So that's always a great fear, of course, and this is why non-proliferation is so important, and response to failing states. So that's always a part of a basic global response to a nuclear armed nation who is fragile, unstable, supports terrorism like you're talking about. But there's also a lot of work in that field, and this is why I think, like India's partnership with so many nations like the United States in preparing those scenarios, increasing your own internal defenses. And I walked the ground of the Mumbai attack, and whether that could have been a lot worse than it was, and then were changes put in place to ensure that that level of border security, that level of partnership with intelligence agencies to ensure these worst case scenarios, a suitcase nuclear weapon was talked about during the Cold War, these type of things. We have to invest in both monitoring these things, but also invest in our own defenses, per GDP estimates and all of this, to ensure that we have both an active program of sharing intelligence to track these things, but also defend every area from that mass casualty worst case scenario event, from monitoring, even radiation testing, all these things that are really important at that national level, and working with other countries, where I think your strength is your allies, is a part of this nuclear monitoring.
John, last question before we let you go. How do you think the United States can help in this effort of non-proliferation?
Yeah, I think the greatest thing is the leadership in accepting actions by nations, whether nuclear armed or not, as in a part of a global. This is why we created the multinational organizations after World War II. Although extremely flawed at this moment, but I still have hope that they can be improved, like the UN Security Council and other aspects. The United States can take that leadership, and having India along with that problem on programs that are important to the world, like nuclear non-proliferation, like monitoring, like economic ties that are defensive alliances, defensive ties that are all important in maintaining this peace and prosperity that we all want for our nations and our allies. But the United States, the only superpower, has a lot of leadership in demonstrating, so not what you say but what you do, leadership when it comes to maintaining international norms, maintaining, if that's within nuclear weapons, but also in responding to terrorism. It's all a part of this post-World War II community that we built, and India is a major part of that.
John, you've given us such a unique and a wonderful perspective on this, and thank you so much. I know I had you at a very short notice. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your thoughts and your clarity. Thank you so much for joining us and speaking to us on NewsX.
Thank you.
We'll take a short break on that note. We'll be right back.